The sun had only shown itself above the horizon, and Claudia Torres was already on her feet. She had gotten used to rising before dawn and managed to get a lot of tasks done by lunchtime. Living in the village left no other option, as relatives and neighbors looked upon those who indulged in bed rest with, to put it mildly, disapproval. True to his nature, Evaristo Torres, Claudia's husband, regarded local customs with an air of superiority, thinking that these rules didn't apply to him. On this August morning, he was also opposed to his wife's bustling activity. Without opening his eyes, he shouted, "Claudia, what kind of person are you? Why do you only think about yourself?" Without hesitation, Claudia retorted, "If I only thought about myself, you would have long starved or been covered in dirt scabs." Evaristo wasn't well versed in the terms the mistress of the house liked to flaunt. Nevertheless, he unmistakably understood that something dreadful was implied by dirt scabs. Fear and revulsion shook him so strongly that it felt as though he had been drinking something bitter without taking a breath for a week. Therefore, as a true man would, he decided to voice his second objection to his wife. "Claudia, I'm amazed at you. Do you really find pleasure in scaring me and our daughter? And where did you pick up such words? Living with you, I'll learn even more, and not necessarily good things. Both you and your precious daughter have gotten used to riding on my back. But someday it will have to end because my patience isn't limitless." With one hand, Claudia skillfully picked up 4 jars and an equal number of 3-liter containers in her other hand. When the glass made an unpleasant scraping sound upon contact, Evaristo twitched again. In a burst of indignant feelings, he threw off the blanket. He struck his knee with his fist, hoping it would have affected his wife. "Claudia, are you doing all this on purpose? You know how that scraping affects me. Couldn't you have prepared all this the night before? Or, at the very least, carried them one by one?" Evaristo was indignant. It seemed to him that Claudia was deliberately getting on his nerves, trying to provoke a quarrel. And there was nothing to quarrel about. She completely disrespected the head of the family. Ignoring her husband's displeasure, the woman carried the dishes out onto the veranda and returned to the long room where Evaristo had recently enjoyed being alone. Claudia rested her plump hands on her hips, eliciting childlike wonder from her husband. "Claudia, you can't even imagine how stunning you look in front of the rising sun. If you had an oar in your right hand, then..." The woman's eyes flashed menacingly. "Hey, Mozart. If it's about an oar, I can run to the barn. Or I can order it for our daughter, she'd gladly fetch it. But I doubt this object would delight you." After hearing those words, Evaristo's vision skewed again, and his right eye even twitched. He realized he had mentioned the oar in vain. To steer the conversation in a more favorable direction, he decided to display his knowledge of the arts. "Claudia, Mozart was a composer, not a painter. You can't be so ignorant. Yeah, I couldn't care less about who suffered for what while drawing a woman with an oar. You, Evaristo, will also face the music one day. You'll get on my nerves, and I'll report you where it's due." Although similar threats had come from his wife's lips before, Evaristo couldn't get used to them. You see, Evaristo had been born with an exceedingly delicate emotional disposition. He attempted to reach his beloved's consciousness. "Claudia, I can't understand what I've done to deserve such profound disrespect from you. After all, I'm your lawful husband. And where do you intend to categorize me if nothing wrong has happened?" Claudia sighed. "And you, Evaristo, don't hide behind the law. Normal husbands at least do something useful around the house while you loaf around day and night." Overflowing with emotions, the woman let out a sob. "And my mother told me, Claudia, don't marry that slob. But I didn't listen to her, I believed in love. And now, here I am, struggling. You, Evaristo, are like a leech on my body. A parasite." Evaristo's patience snapped, and he sprang up from the worn-out couch. "Claudia, there's a limit to everything. You're crossing every boundary and insulting me." Responding to Claudia in the same tone she used with him was simply beyond Evaristo's capability. Firstly, his sensitive emotional nature prevented it. And secondly, if Claudia got angry enough, something heavy might come flying his way. The woman grinned. Parasite, just for you to know, isn't an insult. It's simply an underdeveloped creature, incapable of anything. In my opinion, it's a perfect description of you, Evaristo. You clung to me like a leech 22 years ago and can't detach yourself. With her head held high, Claudia walked out onto the veranda, leaving Evaristo struggling to regain his composure after such unfair insults from his wife. But he wasn't ready to give up, so he put on a sailor's shirt and shuffled along behind his wife. Claudia, let's talk calmly for once in our lives. Evaristo was so overcome with emotion that his pathologically weak legs began to twitch involuntarily. Claudia burst into laughter. Evaristo, don't make me laugh. Why are you trembling like a leaf? If you're in a hurry to use the toilet, hurry up to the outhouse. Otherwise, there might be a mishap any minute now. Claudia openly ridiculed him, and it wasn't the first day. Well, let's not hide the truth, it wasn't the first year either. Every Monday, Evaristo swore to himself that he would change. He would have everything rearranged so meticulously that not a mosquito could find a way in, and certainly not Claudia. But the desire would quickly fade, leaving only laziness, and Evaristo would calmly postpone his transformation to the next Monday. By the conventions of the genre, the next line should have been delivered by Evaristo, but the entrance of a drowsy Lorenza completely changed the scene. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand and stared at the vintage clock hanging on the wall. Oh my God, it's only 5:30. Parents, have you really gone insane by yelling at this hour? While the head of the family scratched his scalp, pondering how to respond to his daughter's valid remark, Claudia retorted with a mocking tone. Here's another specimen of the parasite family. All in for daddy, just like a clone. Father and daughter exchanged glances, not escaping Claudia's notice. With determination, she continued packing cucumbers into jars. However, this process was automatic, as all her attention was focused on the disturbers of her peace. Sweetie, at your age, you should already know that a normal woman who cares about the well-being of her family should wake up early. And you should take an example not from your dad, who's going to develop bed sores soon due to his laziness. Lorenza didn't let her mother finish. She bounded the distance between her and her mother in a single leap and hung onto her neck. Mommy, dear. Don't start the morning with a quarrel. I've got you, and I'm ready to always follow your lead. Tell me, how can I help you right now? Claudia tossed 2 cucumbers into the bucket that didn't fit in the jar. Oh, you little flatterer. You know how to hit me where it hurts. Well, if you're offering, there's work for you too. Just wash yourself up first. Yes, ma'am. The girl gave her mother's cheek a peck and rushed off to get dressed. Claudia looked at her husband with a touch of sadness. Our daughter has grown up, and we hardly even noticed. Evaristo sensed the change in his wife's mood. He immediately decided to use the temporary truce to solidify it. Claudia, it's the law of life, we're aging, and the children are growing up. So it's time for you to change tactics, your commands don't work anymore. And it's getting embarrassing. Besides me, you have no one closer, yet you take it all out on me. The woman looked at her husband with tenderness. Well, what can you expect from him? She knew all too well what a simpleton he was. But love is a complicated thing. All right, Evaristo, your flattery is noted. I'll try not to pressure you. And now, do a good deed, put the water barrel on the stove. The man rushed to carry out the task, but in his work fervor, he didn't fit through the doorway. He let out a yelp and started vigorously rubbing his bruised forehead. The woman couldn't help but burst into laughter. No, this was too much. There are various levels of being a simpleton, but her husband surpassed them all. Why are you so clumsy? Hurry to the refrigerator, there's ice in the freezer. Put it on your forehead, otherwise, a bump will form. As if I needed the neighbors to think I was practicing some sort of corporal punishment. Cursing the narrow doors and his fate, the man rushed to the kitchen. A few seconds later, a sound came from there that unmistakably signaled that the freezer had also offered an unpleasant surprise to the homeowner. Claudia shook her head. Good Lord, even if you attached a personal nanny to a man, he still wouldn't be able to do anything properly. He could possibly turn himself into a disabled man. Then, that's it, game over. The mistress quickly packed yesterday's cucumber harvest into jars and took pleasure in evaluating her work. There we go, everything's in order now. All that's left is to prepare the brine. As loudly as possible, the woman shouted, Lorenza, I need your help. Bring the salt and vinegar. She responded from the depths of the house. Coming, Mom. And in less than a minute, Lorenza appeared on the veranda with salt in her hands. Claudia's cheerful mood instantly vanished. What have you brought? Claudia looked at her daughter with the same expression she had recently given her husband. Lorenza looked surprised. Salt. Just as you asked. That's coarse salt. Regular large grain salt is needed for the cucumbers. Didn't you know that? Lorenza didn't lose her composure. Imagine, Mom, I didn't know that. I don't preserve cucumbers and tomatoes every day. And anyway, I've never liked pickling or canning since childhood. Claudia was taken by surprise. Her eyes narrowed with disapproval. Now her husband's daughter was about to face justice. Oh, so you don't like it? Got a taste of city life? Well, don't worry, I'll bring you back to your senses quickly. As soon as I cut down your allowance, you'll instantly start loving pickled cucumbers and homemade cottage cheese. Lorenza realized she had gone too far. She pouted her lips and leaned against her mother's shoulder, resembling a cunning fox. Mommy, you've got it all wrong. I'm not refusing to help you. I can't possibly keep everything in my head at once. At work, I have to absorb so much information during the day that by evening, I forget my own name. And you're talking about salt. From around the corner, the head of the family said. Indeed, Claudia, why did you pounce on the girl so early in the morning? Want me to run to the store for salt? Give me the money, I'll be quick. Claudia shot her husband a scornful look. Oh, yes, that's the case, let the goat into the garden. Evaristo, you and money are incompatible. And besides, the store is still closed. Let Lorenza go to Grandma's, she always has salt, sugar, and even rustic tobacco in stock. Lorenza raised her eyebrows in surprise. And why do we need rustic tobacco? Mother once again looked indulgently at her daughter. You really are out of the world. It's like you've spent your whole life in a royal palace, not in a village. Tobacco, my dear, is beneficial for the soil. And it's also used to fight various plant pests. Evaristo said more confidently this time. In short, daughter, the thing turns into a well-known substance. Lorenza knew that her parents were about to engage in another verbal duel, but she didn't wait for that moment. A visit to Grandma Ursula was a convenient excuse to escape from home for a while. While she didn't particularly like her father's mother, in this situation, it was better to meet with her grandmother than listen to her parents arguing. Although the village didn't fundamentally differ from thousands of other settlements, a few characteristics gave this place its own unique character. The first characteristic was strong family tradition. This meant that all significant events were celebrated here with grandeur. The number of guests sometimes reached 100, if not more. By the way, according to the latest census, the village's population was almost 2,000 people. Even by modern standards, this was a sizable settlement. And if you added the urban relatives to the main population, you could imagine the scale of weddings and anniversaries that were regularly celebrated here. Therefore, a public dining establishment continued to operate successfully in the village. During the day, it functioned as an ordinary canteen, and in the evenings, significant events were celebrated here. The local youth also enjoyed gathering in the cozy hall, where they could let loose without parental supervision. The second village characteristic was a consequence of the first. Each new generation was obligated to remember these traditions and pass down this heritage to their offspring. In this context, after getting married, Claudia found herself madly in love with the local accordionist, Evaristo. She never once considered what her relationship with her mother-in-law would be like. Claudia's mother, Marta, had warned her daughter many times. "Claudia, you shouldn't let your emotions lead you. Evaristo is not who he seems to you. He's spineless and weak. Life will be difficult with a husband like him. But his mother is a true spawn of hell." The description that the teacher of the village elementary school had given to Claudia's future relative contained nothing unnecessary. On the contrary, many remarkable traits could be added to it. After all, Ursula was feared in the village not only by adults but also by misbehaving children. For instance, one could often hear, "If you don't finish your porridge, Ursula will come and take you for revenge." The nickname Ursula was assigned to the elderly woman a long time ago, right after she arrived in the village. To her husband, who had decided to wait out the difficult times in his homeland, she declared, "Julio, where have you brought me? There's only riffraff here. Not a single decent person." Since then, the villagers have held a grudge against the wife of the new farm chairman. However, he soon left his family for his mistress. But the villagers didn't sympathize with the abandoned woman, they took the side of the traitor. Any man would run away from such a shrew. Not only does she consider herself better than others, she also insults everyone. To this conclusion, someone added succinctly, "She's Ursula, that's who she is." So, the heedless word Ursula had tossed aside became associated with her, and Evaristo was even called Ursula's son. The young man was quite shy and ashamed of his nickname. Many times he tried to reason with his mother. "Mom, you shouldn't argue with the neighbors for no reason. If you don't care about your own reputation, at least think about me." Ursula didn't acknowledge anyone else's opinion. Thus, her son's plea acted like a red flag to a bull. "You shouldn't even say a word about it. Your father ran away and left everything on my shoulders. I'm working hard, trying to make sure you have everything. And instead of gratitude, I hear discontent." Indeed, Evaristo's mother spared no effort for him. True, she displayed her maternal love not so much out of sincere concern for her son, but rather to show up the neighbors. No one in the village wanted to associate with her, even the closest neighbors avoided her if they happened to meet on the road. Nobody visited the Torres house, not even Evaristo's school friends, who categorically declined such invitations. The young man was deeply affected by this, but his mother reassured him. "Don't worry, Evaristo, we'll overcome this. I'll show them all who Ursula Torres is. They'll choke on their envy, and one day I'll dance on their graves." Evaristo shuddered at the thought of this horrifying scene, but he didn't say anything to his mother. Ursula was one of those women who didn't speak in vain. She gradually began to put her plan into action. Evaristo was quite surprised when piglets appeared in a small shed. "Mom, why did you get them? Who will take care of these animals?" The woman responded calmly, "Who? You and I will take care of them. Let's see how it goes. Later, we can even get a sow." Things went reasonably well, but most of the work fell on Evaristo's shoulders, and he couldn't wait to finish school. The situation worsened when his mother bought a cow. "Evaristo, look at the beauty I've brought. Now we'll have fresh milk and sour cream." Although the son didn't share his mother's joy, he had to accept it. With the appearance of the cow, Evaristo's life became unbearable, and his mother treated him like a hired worker. "Evaristo, if you gather hay for Milka for the winter, I'll buy you a motorcycle." And he would jump up early in the morning to fulfill his mother's request. After all, riding a motorcycle around the village was every teenager's dream at the time. Soon, Evaristo replaced the bike with a real motorcycle, and later he got a car. Having a means of transport boosted Evaristo's self-esteem, and his standing in the village changed drastically. He no longer looked down but walked with his head held high, listening to the admiring comments of his fellow villagers. "Look at how the guy has changed. Money is a life-giving force. You could say that Ursula has turned everyone around." Evaristo also firmly believed in the power of money and began to treat his mother with great respect. Ursula liked the way her son cared for her, and she generously compensated him for it. It seemed like all the sharp issues in the Torres family were resolved. The only thing left was to decide on a career choice. Evaristo knew that in her dreams, his mother saw him as an animal husbandry expert, but he couldn't abandon his own childhood dream. After all, while still in school, he had showcased various talents. He sang well and danced skillfully. In elementary school, Marta noticed the talented boy and always pushed him into the role of hosting school events. Evaristo excelled at handling even the most complex texts, earning recognition from the entire teaching staff. Torres will go far, what a talent he is. We need to place him in good hands. One day, an entire delegation from the Cultural College visited their school. Marta decided not to miss such an opportunity and introduced the boy to knowledgeable people. At the request of the teacher, Evaristo confidently demonstrated his singing and dancing skills. The visitors were delighted and applauded the young prodigy for a long time. When the applause subsided, an important man asked him, "Boy, what would you like to become in the future?" Evaristo felt his significance because nobody had talked to him about such matters before. And his mother always brushed him off. "You don't understand anything about life yet. It will be as I say." But Evaristo had his own dream. Since the man who asked the question inspired trust, the boy blurted out, "I want to play the accordion. My dad could play Amor Waves." The man raised an eyebrow in surprise and approvingly remarked, "A good wish. Let your dad teach you for now, and when you grow up, you'll join us." The celebration of the soul ended before it could truly begin. Evaristo lowered his eyes in embarrassment. Dad left us and took the accordion with him. It was said with such intonation that the representative of the cultural school couldn't tell what had upset the child more, his father leaving the family or the disappearance of the musical instrument. Marta was present during this conversation, and she genuinely felt sorry for the boy. She invited him over to their house. Evaristo was on the brink of tears of joy because nobody had ever invited him to their home before. He shared this news with his mother. "Our teacher invited me to her house." Ursula looked at her son sideways. "Well, go. Maybe they'll treat you to something tasty. Just don't stay there too long." That evening, Evaristo went to visit. Marta welcomed him warmly and introduced him to her daughter. Claudia made an indelible impression on the boy. She was not only good-looking but also knew many interesting stories about travelers and different animals. Despite being 2 years younger than Evaristo, her knowledge far surpassed his. After a hearty dinner prepared by Marta, the children retreated to Claudia's room, and Evaristo forgot about the time. He arrived home later than his mother had told him, and for that, he got a scolding from her. "What time did I tell you to come?" Evaristo habitually lowered his eyes and stammered with a tremor in his voice. "At 8. But I didn't notice how time flew." His mother raised her voice and even made a threatening gesture, something she had never allowed herself to do before. "So that you remember what I tell you, you'll stay home for a week with no outings or guests. During that time, you can clean up after the pigs." It was the harshest punishment. But Evaristo didn't suspect that his mother would go even further. The next day, during the lunch break, he saw his mother talking to Marta. Since the woman was gesturing with her hands, the boy understood that he shouldn't have expected anything good from this visit. A sense of unease passed through Evaristo, and he even hid under the stairs to avoid his mother finding him. He stayed hidden there until the end of classes. But he couldn't escape home unnoticed. His teacher detained him in the hallway. Marta spoke calmly. "Evaristo, skipping classes without a valid reason is not good. By the way, your mother came to school today. She complained that you're not helping her around the house." Indignation filled the boy, and he shouted, "I help her, I clean up after the pigs. If you only knew how much I hate them." 2 large tears rolled down his tan cheeks, and Marta couldn't contain herself. She pulled the boy closer. Evaristo, that's not right. The animals are not to blame if your mother makes you do impossible work. Understand that she's struggling on her own, so sometimes she can be overly harsh. Try not to argue with her and help more. An unpleasant thought flashed through Evaristo's mind. All the adults stick together. So Marta turned to his mother's side too. He wanted to think about something important, but he didn't have time because the teacher, with a smile on her face, said, "Claudia asked about you. You can come to visit us anytime if your mother lets you." Only a few days later, Evaristo learned from accidental witnesses that his mother had berated Marta. She accused the teacher of leading other people's children astray. Despite always feeling a tremor in front of his mother, the desire to restore justice prevailed. He had his first argument with Ursula. "Mom, why did you offend the teacher? She's the kindest to me, and her daughter is cool. She wants to be friends with me. After all, I don't have any friends at all." He looked at his mother with a mature gaze, and for the first time, she couldn't maintain her authority. Her commanding tone suddenly turned into muttering. "Look at him," he started expressing his opinion. "Well, I'm not against your teacher. Not at all. You can be friends even with the devil without harming the household." That was his first victory over his overbearing mother. Evaristo scored his second victory by enrolling in the cultural school. His mother had to accept this fact. He returned to his native village after 3 years as a well-prepared worker for the cultural institution and was immediately appointed as the club's director. After that, Ursula became a noticeable figure in the village, and neighbors began greeting her. Even Fernanda Santos, who used to be the chief disruptor of peace, now respectfully nodded. "Good day to you, Ursula. What's up with Evaristo in his new position?" Although such questions were like balm to her heart, she answered them without her previous arrogance, but with dignity. "He's settled in already and wants to build a team. They promised him new musical instruments." Fernanda twinkled. "Instruments are good, of course, but a good fiancé is even better." Fernanda chuckled, and Ursula felt her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The mere thought of someone trying to take her son away made her panic. Forgetting her manners, she began interrogating the gossipmonger eagerly. "Fernanda, if you know something, spill it out nicely." Fernanda's eyes darted around. "Oh, so you yourself aren't aware that your Evaristo is head over heels in love with the teacher's daughter?" Ursula sighed with relief, as she had expected to hear a more weighty argument. "You surprised me for nothing. I thought you had some revelation that I wasn't aware of. But it's just small stuff. Evaristo has been friends with Claudia since childhood. But my son isn't thinking about marriage yet." Fernanda made an incomprehensible movement with her eyes again. "That's how it seems to you. Young people today like to be surprised. Once, I saw them sweetly kissing in the meadow beyond the river. Maybe they've already arranged a granddaughter or a grandson for you, and you have no clue." Fernanda rejoiced, while Ursula was standing bewildered in the middle of the street. An inner voice was insisting, "Ursula, Evaristo is a grown man now, and you won't keep him by force. So accept your future fate as a mother-in-law." But Ursula wasn't accustomed to surrendering without a fight. She had already decided that she would make the future bride's life amusing. She knew very well that her son could easily fall under any influence. Therefore, she decided to preempt the opponent's actions and search for a suitable bride for herself. Certainly, Claudia had no inkling of Ursula's secret intentions. She was finishing her studies at the veterinary college and came home only for holidays and breaks. Marta was raising her daughter on her own, and she didn't have spare money for Claudia's weekly trips. The girl learned all the news from her mother during international phone calls. Once Claudia asked, "How's Evaristo? Does he visit you?" This question caught the woman off guard, and she replied with feigned cheerfulness, "Yes, I'm busy with work all the time, and Evaristo doesn't have free time. Our village gossips were saying that he's planning to start an orchestra. He's waiting for the instruments." Claudia understood that her mother was trying to evade a direct answer. She didn't torture her with more questions, and she quickly said goodbye. For the weekend, the girl came to her hometown to verify the truth of the rumors that had reached her. And if she believed the rumors, her boyfriend hadn't waited for her and had even found another girl. Therefore, as her first action, she didn't head to school to delight her mother with her visit. Instead, she went to the club. In the heart of rural culture, a rehearsal was in full swing. Local talents, mostly unmarried girls, were singing, and the young club director was playing the accordion with inspiration. There was nothing inherently suspicious about this scene, but Claudia's discerning eye immediately spotted her rival. It turned out to be Tina Santos, a former classmate. This girl had gained a not-so-good reputation as a homewrecker. According to unconfirmed information, Tina didn't shy away from married men, and one time, one of the deceived wives gave her a thrashing. People said that the woman had beaten up the girl so thoroughly that she didn't appear on the streets for a whole month. The mother of the victim claimed that her daughter had been attacked by bullies. You can't imagine what those scoundrels did to my Tina. Not only did they steal her purse and earrings, but they also broke her nose. Sympathetic people asked Fernanda a fair question. Why didn't you report the assault to the local police? Fernanda was flustered and blurted out randomly. Well, the officer was on vacation. And when he returned, it was already too late to find that criminal. But the villagers, especially the women, understood perfectly well why Fernanda didn't want to make a fuss. Later, the whole truth came out, but neither the daughter nor her mother were bothered by this fact. However, it seemed that Tina hadn't learned her lesson well and had once again started pursuing other women's husbands and fiancés. That's exactly what Claudia was thinking as she observed the course of rehearsals from the niche at the very back of the auditorium, which wasn't visible from the stage. The amateur group performed several well-known songs on the accordion, and Evaristo thanked the girls. Thanks, everyone. The next rehearsal is on Friday. The girls rushed towards the exit in a group, only Tina was left on the stage. An audacious smile played on the girl's face as she headed towards the director. Evaristo, I didn't quite remember my part. Maybe you could work with me individually? The young man was surprised. Tina, I didn't notice any mistakes in your performance. You're singing right on key and everything. Tina took another step and stood right in front of the director. Taken aback by the suddenness, he froze, and Tina said in a seductive voice, Evaristo, if everything's going smoothly for me, why don't you make me a soloist? While the young man was contemplating how to respond to the singer, she placed her hands on his shoulders. Claudia could no longer watch calmly as the audacious girl made advances towards her fiancé. She decisively stepped out of her hiding place and walked towards the stage. Oh, so this is how rehearsals are conducted here. Evaristo released himself from Tina's grip. Claudia? When did you arrive? Yes, just off the train and straight here. Claudia walked onto the stage and cast an assessing glance at her rival. Tina, what are those eyes of yours popping out for? Get away from here. It infuriated the would-be soloist, and with her typical audacity, she declared, And who do you think you are to boss me around? By the way, this club is a public place, and anyone can come here. Anyone can, but you can't. And why is that? Tina stared at Evaristo, but he quickly averted his gaze. Claudia realized that the last word was hers. Tina, the thing is, you don't fit the definition of human. By all accounts, you're a hyena, an animal that feeds on carrion. Tina's eyes widened. Evaristo, say something. The young man had fully regained his composure and tried to mediate between the feuding parties without harming himself. Girls, there's no need to argue. Tina, I'll see you on Friday. As for soloing, I need to think about it. Although there were no witnesses to the duel in the club, by the evening the whole village knew about it in the finest detail. Marta scolded her daughter. Claudia, a respectable girl, should rise above such disputes. Honestly, I didn't expect such an outrageous outburst from you. Are you forcing yourself on Evaristo? Claudia wasn't even offended by her mother, who reasonably pointed out, Mom, you have outdated standards. Times have changed, and you have to fight for your own happiness. Marta, usually composed, was agitated this time. And do you think Evaristo is worth fighting for? Yes, he's nothing. A mama's boy through. That's who he is. With him, you're sure to be doomed. He can't stand up for himself, let alone his family. Well, so be it. I like him the way he is. Marta knew that trying to convince her daughter was a futile endeavor. However, she still hoped that there would be another girl besides Tina who would captivate Evaristo. Evaristo's mother was wrestling with the same problem. Since the Tina incident fell through, she has feverishly searched for a replacement candidate. And time was working against her. The situation was further complicated by the fact that after Tina rudely rejected Claudia, Fernanda stopped noticing Ursula. Trying to mend their relationship, Evaristo's mother took the first step towards reconciliation. She approached Santos herself. Fernanda, are you holding a grudge against me? I had no involvement in this. Claudia showed up unexpectedly somehow. She spoke so sincerely that Fernanda believed her. Are you telling the truth? Was it you who embarrassed Tina? Ursula crossed herself. For God's sake. Am I capable of such a thing? I swear by whatever you want, even my cow. Fernanda burst into laughter from the heart. Incredible. I never thought a cow could be more valuable than a person. Usually, people swear by their mothers or other relatives, and you're offering your cow. Remarkable. The relationship between the friends was restored, and they began to work together on neutralizing the unwanted fiancé. But their cunning plans were not destined to come true because Evaristo and Claudia decided to get married. They decided not to inform their mothers about it to avoid any unforeseen circumstances. Evaristo was most concerned about this. Claudia, I think it's better not to wake the beast. I mean my mother. You know what she's capable of. So, should we tell her the day before the wedding? I think there's no need to make a fuss for the whole village. Why waste money? We can use it ourselves. Evaristo didn't expect this turn of events, but he admired his fiancée. Claudia, you're a unique girl. Everyone dreams of a wedding, a lavish dress, and all the other trimmings, but not you. The girl playfully flicked his nose. Evaristo, I'm just being practical. As the date of the wedding approached, the young couple had to reveal their secret. Marta didn't exactly welcome the news, but she took it tolerantly. Ursula, on the other hand, didn't even hesitate to cry in front of her future daughter-in-law. Oh, what's happening? I'm the last one to find out that he's getting married. Have I deserved such treatment? Or is Claudia more important to you than your own mother? Evaristo tried to reassure his tearful mother, who continued to voice reproaches. What am I going to do all alone now? Claudia was tired of these sufferings and decided to make her point. We'll help you. Ursula looked at the girl with hope. Really? I always keep my promises. Back then, Claudia didn't realize that she was signing her own verdict. The future mother-in-law, having reneged on her promise, wasn't appeased. She wanted to have a face-to-face talk with her future relative. Later that evening, armed with a bottle of her own homemade liquor, she visited her. Marta, please welcome the guest. In the old days, it was customary to get acquainted with the bride's mother, so to speak, adhering to ancestral traditions. Claudia's mother warmly invited the future mother-in-law into the house. Please come in, Ursula. I also value upholding traditions. Then let's start with that. The guest entered the kitchen and placed the bottle on the table. This is for us. She sat down on a chair, implying that she held the upper hand. Marta had no objections to this arrangement. I'm ready to listen to you, Ursula. My intuition tells me that you intend to talk about our children's fate. The guest drummed her fingers on the table. Exactly. And let me tell you straight away, Marta, that I'm not happy. With what? Everything. Firstly, it doesn't sit right with me that there won't be a wedding. Just think about what people will say about us. Claudia's mother smirked. They'll probably say we're stingy and didn't want to spend money. Ursula perked up. Exactly, that's what I'm talking about. Of course, your salary isn't high, and you can't afford much. The hostess of the house interrupted the guest. Why are you drawing such conclusions? We're living just fine, no worse than others. The guest slyly remarked. And what dowry will you give? A washing machine or a vacuum cleaner? Marta shrugged. What's wrong with household appliances? In my opinion, such devices are needed in every household. Evaristo's mother sprawled comfortably on her chair. Her face had reddened from the consumed liquor, and her tongue was loosened, so she decided to speak her mind plainly. Well, dear future relative, let me tell you this. You, even though you're a teacher, don't understand anything about life. Nowadays, money decides everything. You can't get anywhere without it. The guest reached for the bottle, but Marta covered her glass with her hand. Thanks, I've had enough. As you wish. I'll have a little more. But don't think I'm into this stuff. No, God forbid. And my husband was a non-drinker, a very decent man. Then why did he leave you with your son? Who knows? He was missing something. He said I was like a scarecrow, all appearance and no substance. So, he went after those who could give him more. Well, that's all in the past. Right now, I'm worried about the fate of my only son. He's used to getting everything without refusal. I bought him a motorcycle, then a car, and recently I even gifted him a German accordion. You can't imagine how much such an instrument costs. The authorities promised a good accordion for the region, but they brought such junk. So I bought it for him and made it a gift. Ursula took a deep breath, as if preparing for a plunge into water. Of course, a wedding is a special event. That's why the gift should be special too. I thought long and hard, and I've come to the conclusion that we need to give our children a house. Marta exclaimed in surprise. Unfortunately, that's beyond my means. I don't have such resources. The guest triumphed. I wasn't expecting any other answer from you. You intellectuals are not used to hard work, and I've spent my whole conscious life with my back bent, all for the sake of my only son. I raised piglets and tended cows, that's why I have plenty of money. Marta became wary. What are you trying to imply with that? I'm saying that you, even though you're a teacher, are essentially a sly beggar. You don't have anything that belongs to you. The host's nerves started to fray. She simply wanted to take this smug fool and throw her out the door, but her upbringing prevented her from stooping to such actions. Marta spoke very politely yet firmly. Ursula, I understand what you wanted to convey. My daughter and I aren't trying to worm our way into your family or claim your money. Frankly, I'm absolutely indifferent to what you decide to gift the children for their wedding. I believe it's best not to interfere with them. Let them figure out for themselves what's more important, love or money. Evaristo's mother understood that the conversation could be considered finished. She reluctantly stood up from her chair and took the half-empty bottle of tincture from the table. Without saying goodbye to the hostess, the guest left, and Marta replayed certain moments of the conversation in her memory for a long time. She decided not to tell her daughter about the visit from her future mother-in-law. A few days later, the young couple got married and celebrated the event in the village dining hall, which functioned as a restaurant on festive occasions. Despite the narrow circle of guests, there were many presents. Marta gifted the newlyweds a modern washing machine that also dried clothes. Evaristo's mother handed over a set of bed linens and a knife set. The guests were outraged by this gesture because rural people believed in omens and knew that a knife was a symbol of illness and trouble. Therefore, such items shouldn't be given to loved ones. From her mother's stories, Lorenza knew about her grandmother Ursula's difficult character. Of course, Claudia kept many things hidden from her daughter. For example, she didn't tell her about the spells her grandmother had cast on her. She didn't mention the petty tricks, like hiding chicken feathers and needles, that her mother-in-law would slip into secret places during her visits. While Marta was alive, Claudia still tried to influence her husband's mother in some way. She helped with household chores and once even saved a cow from consuming poisonous plants. But instead of gratitude, the daughter-in-law received reprimands and taunting remarks every time. Claudia, don't try to be smarter than you actually are. So, you saved a cow, and what? Are you going to beat the drums about it? There's no heroism in that. I could have handled it myself. What angered the mother-in-law the most was the fact that the village respected Claudia, not her, as a person and a high-class professional. After all, it was her daughter-in-law who became a certified veterinarian, not her son. Evaristo only held the position of club director for a few years before burning out like a light bulb. His careless attitude towards work led to the disintegration of the team he had worked so hard to build. Several times, he was summoned to the regional administration and pleaded with to change his ways, but Evaristo paid no heed to their pleas. When his wife asked him, "And what do you plan to do now? How will you earn a living?" he responded enthusiastically, "Don't worry about me, I won't become a layabout. I'll play at weddings. Believe me, there's so much demand that I could play nonstop." Indeed, initially, the accordion player was in high demand, but later he received fewer invitations, and under pressure from his wife, he had to get a job as a driver at the post office. A new director hadn't appeared, so they put a big padlock on the cultural establishment's door. Later, the dilapidated building was purchased by a businessman with a peculiar last name, Cella. Max was an outsider in the village, and from the way he spoke, one could sense his affluent past. His arrival in the village caused a real commotion. He rolled up in a shiny black car, stuck his head out of the window, and asked, "So, how's life going for you Aborigines?" The unfamiliar word confused the old folks who happened to be witnesses to Max's arrival. Only one old man raised his cane against the businessman's car and shouted, "You take that word back. Go back to where you came from. We don't need lords and other noble folk here, we have enough of our own." The newcomer laughed heartily and drove on, while the witnesses scattered in different directions to warn their neighbors about the suspicious character who had arrived in the village. Fernanda was among them and was the first to tell Ursula about the bald man in the off-road vehicle. Rolling her eyes out of habit, she startled her friend from the doorway. "Oh, what's happening? It looks like the end of the world is near." Ursula asked indifferently. "Well, what's happened now? A true oligarch just arrived here. Said he'll be living here. Let him live. What business is it of ours?" Fernanda was outraged. "What business? This guy looks like a criminal, and look at those chains he's wearing." Fernanda gestured with her hands to indicate the size of the gold jewelry. Admittedly, her story didn't impress Ursula in the slightest. But when the same Fernanda reported the next day, "Remember I told you about the oligarch yesterday? Well, he's already bought our club and wants to open a store there. He also has an eye on the farm. He wants to take it over." Fernanda froze, then smiled gleefully. "By the way, Ursula, this Max buys milk from private farms, and the price is higher. So keep that in mind." Ursula thanked Fernanda for the useful information and, acting on her tip, went to establish contact with the new village resident. Of course, the mother-in-law didn't see the need to inform her daughter-in-law, who was responsible for collecting milk from private farms, about her decision. When Claudia learned of her future mother-in-law's latest escapade, she was furious. She decided to tell her exactly what had been bothering her for years during their coexistence. Ursula didn't expect her daughter-in-law's visit and was initially taken aback. "Claudia, is that you?" "It's me, in the flesh," Claudia said from the threshold. Though she tried to be exceedingly polite, her voice rang. "Ursula, I can't fathom what you're trying to do. Instead of offering any help, you're constantly throwing obstacles in my path. What help do you need? You're a proud and very independent woman in our eyes." "Yes, I am. But your son needs care. He can't do anything, and I'm tired of being his babysitter." The mother-in-law rejoiced. Look at you singing. I remember that Evaristo used to not even give you a chance. If he had married Tina, his life would have been different. Oh please, don't tell me that it's my fault that you raised a lazy son. Yes, Tina would have kicked him out the next day. Because a bumbling fool and layabout like your son only gets in the way at home. The women argued, and Lorenza watched their faces. Since she had witnessed similar scenes very often, she had grown used to them. Evaristo was also an outside observer, as he put it, of ladies' disputes, and he carefully maintained neutrality. He enjoyed being the subject of this long-standing debate between these two women. Winking at his daughter, he often said, "While Grandma and Mom are arguing, my dear, I'm living the good life. And what if they become friends? Then, my dear, your old man is in trouble." Since it was in the man's interest to stoke the flames of conflict, he asked his daughter to convey a message to his mother about her. The latter's fault lay in giving all the cow's milk to the oligarch. The little girl was puzzled by her father's request. "Daddy, but isn't it wrong to tattle on family members? Grandma might get mad at you." "She won't find out. This isn't tattling, it's a noble deed. Why don't you just tell her yourself?" "I can't. You see what's happening between us. I don't need to escalate this conflict further. Just quietly tell your mom everything as a secret." Lorenza followed her father's instructions, but she didn't expect Claudia to react to the news with a storm of negative emotions. For probably an hour, Claudia scolded her grandmother with various words. She called her an adventurer and an old crank. Worse words were uttered too, but the girl understood that there was no need to pass them on to her grandmother. She had decided not to tell Ursula anything at all. After that incident, the relationship between the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law became irreparably strained. Ursula stopped visiting them, but through her granddaughter, she was kept informed about family events. One day, Lorenza found her grandmother in tears, and the girl was genuinely frightened. "Grandma, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? Should I call a doctor for you?" Ursula waved her off. "A doctor won't help here, Claudia is right. I'm the fool, that alligator got me." The girl recoiled in fear. "You saw a crocodile." "Where?" Ursula smiled sadly. "He moved in here with us." "Is that the bald man who bought the house near the store?" "The very same." "Well, he's an oligarch, not an alligator." "It doesn't matter to me, both of them are dangerous beasts." "Did this Max fight with you?" The elderly woman started to lose patience with her granddaughter's endless questions. "Where did you get the idea that he had a fight with me?" "Well, you said he tricked you." "My dear child, this unpleasant man tricked me out of money. I gave him all the milk from my cow for 3 whole months, denied myself, and he didn't pay me a single cent. He kept saying later, later, but yesterday he claimed that my milk was of poor quality and that he had disposed of it all. Therefore, he won't pay anything for such goods. Now I'm sitting here like an old woman by a broken trough and don't know what to do." Lorenza, being a compassionate child, wanted to help his grandmother. "Grandma, we should tell the local police to let them put that bald guy in jail." Ursula hugged the girl. "You don't understand anything yet. You won't get anything out of this bloodsucker, and the local police won't help here. Here's what you should do. Tell your mom to come over to me from the farm to get the milk." The girl relayed the conversation almost word for word to Claudia. The woman looked at her daughter with affection. "Lorenza, you're like a carrier pigeon for us. Tell your beloved Ursula that we'll come to her tomorrow, and I'll make a note of it. We did warn everyone in the village not to trust such swindlers outright." Claudia turned to her husband. "Can you believe it, Evaristo? This guy even tried to get to our farm, but he failed. Evaristo was trying to fix an electric kettle. I wonder, what's the catch?" Claudia affectionately looked at her husband. "Your memory is short, like a girl's on her wedding day. I've already told you that our farm is collectively owned. To sell it, we need the consent of all the shareholders." Lost in thought, Evaristo started fiddling with the kettle. I think you're celebrating victory too soon. People like Max can lure anyone in, you just need to throw more money at them. Few can resist someone like him. Time showed that both the mother and the father were right. No matter how hard Max tried, he couldn't take over the farm that was making good profits. However, one of the shareholders bought out the enterprise. The new owner began to tighten discipline at the company and also cut the workers' salaries. Unpleasant changes happened right before Evaristo's arrival. Claudia was deeply affected by these changes and was in a bad mood. That's why Lorenza didn't dare bring up a very important topic with her. But because she was bursting with joy and couldn't wait to share her upcoming changes in her personal life with someone, she decided to confide in her grandmother. Going to get salt was a convenient excuse to leave the house. Clearly, the emotions bubbling within the girl were reflected on her face because Ursula immediately asked, "Why did you come so early in the morning?" "Mom told me to come for some salt. She's canning cucumbers and realized we're out of coarse salt." The elderly woman muttered in dissatisfaction. A good housewife should always have matches and salt at home. Lorenza defended her mother. "We do have them, but it's extra brand salt, and we haven't been using matches for a while because we have a special lighter." "Stop chattering. Why are you standing at the door? Come in. I'll put the kettle on. From the way you look, I can tell you haven't had breakfast yet." The girl slipped off her ballet flats and tiptoed into the larger room. She knew her grandmother liked cleanliness and order, so she tried not to disrupt that harmony. "Go into the kitchen, that's where we'll have breakfast. No need to bring dirt into the living room." Lorenza obediently followed this instruction. The kitchen was flooded with sunlight that was filtering through the sheer curtains. Ursula quickly set the table and placed 2 cups. "Do you want it piping hot, or should it cool down a bit?" "Grandma, you know I don't like it boiling hot. People's tastes change. Maybe you've changed your habits since you've been in the city. How would I know? You visit rarely now." The last remark was made with a clear reproach, and Lorenza felt her face flushing. "Grandma, you know I'm really busy right now. And I can't take time off from work every week. I've only recently started working at this company. But people have weekends to visit family and relax. Something tells me you have another reason." The elderly woman looked at her granddaughter, and Lorenza felt an uncomfortable heat rise in her cheeks. She was the first to avert her eyes and started fiddling with the fringe on the tablecloth. "Grandma, you can't hide anything from me. You can practically read minds from a distance." Trying to hide her embarrassment, Lorenza took a sip from the cup and immediately burned her tongue. "Oh, it's so hot. I'm going to get blisters in my mouth now." Ursula took a sip too. "It's normal. Just coffee. You don't need to talk about your teeth, spill your secrets. I can see your eyes are shining. Is there a new love in your city life?" Evaristo exhaled noisily. "Well, Grandma, you're something. You really can read minds. Okay, don't be shy, tell me. And I promise I won't tell a soul." "Really? Has Grandma ever lied to you?" Lorenza cautiously touched the rim of the cup with her lips. "Okay, fine, I'll tell you. So, Grandma, I have a young man in my life now. We work together, or more accurately, he's my supervisor." "Is he older?" The girl laughed. "No, what are you thinking about? He's only 26. We just have many departments, and each has its own manager. Salvador was recently appointed to replace someone who moved to another company. Yes, our department only has 6 people, so the manager isn't too high up." Ursula nodded. "Like in our accounting department, there were only 5 people on staff, but there had to be a manager attached. Grandma, today's managers are different, and they do regular work too. They just have more responsibility. And what's so good about Salvador?" Lorenza blushed again. "He's honest, decent, and well-mannered." The girl stumbled, and Ursula immediately seized the initiative. "Is that all?" Lorenza stammered. He's also handsome. Oh, girl. Who is choosing a husband based on the way he looks? That's how they jump into marriage in joy, and a year later they're running for divorce. Your grandpa was quite a handsome man too, but he turned out to be a scoundrel in life. Lorenza pleaded. Grandma, why go to extremes so quickly? Of course, I can't say for sure that Salvador meets all the criteria of a real man, but I find it easy and interesting with him. We have a lot in common, and we've been dating for almost 6 months now. Let me guess in one shot, have you already set a wedding date? The granddaughter rushed into her grandmother's arms. You're like an X-ray, you see through everything. Yes, we filed the application a week ago, and I came to share the joyful news with you. But it's not working out yet. Mom's not in the mood. There are problems at her work. I know, the girls from the farm told me. But don't worry, these problems will be resolved sooner or later, and a daughter's wedding happens only once in a lifetime. So, you can't keep such a secret for long. Maybe this news will lift Claudia's spirits. Grandma, you're wonderful. It's just a pity that you and Mom can't become friends. Both Dad and I love both of you, but you're always at odds with each other. The girl became emotional and started kissing her grandmother. The older woman gently pushed her away. All right, that's enough buttering up. Take the salt and go home. And tell your mother, don't postpone it, or she'll be upset. There was so much tenderness in the voice of the elderly woman that Evaristo was momentarily stunned in surprise. But her grandmother nudged her. Hurry up, your mother probably can't wait for you to come. Perhaps Lorenzo was absorbing the sunlight, running down the street, and scaring the wandering chickens and ducks. After the conversation with her grandmother, she felt light in her heart. She wanted to sing and laugh. It was a moment of true happiness. And she remembered her fiancé. I wonder what Salvador is doing right now. Maybe I should call him. She dialed her fiancé's number several times, but he kept rejecting her calls. Her sunny mood instantly vanished, and Lorenzo walked back home dejectedly. She delivered the salt to her mother but postponed the important conversation for later. At the same time, Salvador Rey was in a meeting with his boss. The faces of everyone present were tense because they were discussing important production matters. Salvador too tried to focus on the CEO's speech, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Just at that moment, his phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. He discreetly took the phone out. Lorenza was calling. The thought raced through his mind, what's happened? She knows perfectly well that meetings are always scheduled at this time. He declined the call and returned the phone to its place, but the device started vibrating feverishly again in his pocket. He had to decline the call again. Knowing his fiancé's relentless nature, Salvador decided to send her a short message. But he couldn't do it inconspicuously. Rolling his eyes wildly, his boss stared at him. Mr. Rey, I can see that the company's affairs absolutely don't concern you. Or are things in your department going perfectly? Caught off guard, the manager stood up slowly and stammered in defense. We have our shortcomings too, but we're trying to fix them as they arise. The boss raised his tone. You shouldn't wait for these problems to arise, you should strive to prevent them. I've noticed that you, Mr. Rey, are quite careless about your responsibilities, and there's utter chaos in your department. Salvador attempted to object, but the boss fixed him with a single glance. And don't try to say something in your defense. All the flaws in your work, so to speak, are evident. The employees in your department shamelessly and unconscionably wander around town during working hours, and some of them you allow to take unauthorized leaves? Salvador suspected that someone had informed his boss that he had granted Lorenza a week off. Since arguing with his boss was futile, he silently awaited the continuation of the scolding. But his boss limited himself to just a couple of sentences. It's very disappointing, Salvador, that you haven't lived up to our expectations. We appointed you as the head of the department to provide you with growth prospects, and you. Salvador already knew what his boss was about to say, and he nearly shouted. I'll improve, I promise. Smiles appeared on the faces of the meeting participants, and someone even chuckled. The tension cracked, and the boss himself lightened up. Looks like I'm the only one unaware of what everyone else here knows. One of the deputy chiefs said. Rodrigo, don't scold the young man so harshly, he's going through a special period right now. Someone said quite loudly with a laugh. The mating season. Everyone chuckled together, and even the boss displayed a flawless smile. Well, since that's the case, we'll forgive him this time. But with the condition that we're invited to the wedding. If you don't mind sharing, who's the bride? The same expert on bird behavior briskly answered. It's a girl who joined us not long ago. You must remember her, she came to us from the institute with a red diploma. The boss brightened up. Of course, I remember her well. She used to bring me reports for a while. Although workplace romances aren't encouraged here, if it's serious, all I can do is wish you happiness. The meeting ended on such a jovial note, and Salvador hurried towards the exit. He really wanted to hear his beloved girlfriend's voice, but before he could dial Lorenza's number, he was distracted once again. Salvador thought bitterly, I'll have to postpone our conversation until the evening. But after work, his mother was waiting for him in the parking lot. Nora Ray looked at her son discontentedly. You've completely become arrogant. Have you forgotten about your parents? I've been calling you all morning, and you've been ignoring my calls. Could you maybe explain what's going on? Salvador involuntarily blurted out. So it was you calling me all morning. And here I was thinking it was Lorenza trying to get hold of me. Nora gave her son a disdainful look. Salvador, are you okay? Where's this puppy-like excitement coming from? Did that countryside girl have such a bad influence on you? The tone of his mother's voice and the expression on her face spoke volumes about her attitude towards Lorenza. She hadn't taken a liking to the girl from their first meeting, and Salvador could already imagine the shock his mother would experience upon learning about their impending wedding. However, he didn't want to discuss his personal matters in the parking lot with bystanders. He nudged his mother towards the car. Mom, please, this isn't the place for such delicate conversations. The woman scoffed. Why are you shoving me into the car like a suitcase? Your father is waiting for me near the shopping center. And I want to let you know that he's very dissatisfied with you and wants to talk. That's actually why I came. Since Salvador had blocked her way out, Nora had to sit in the passenger seat. Salvador closed the door and got into the car as well. He calmly said, Mom, why do you have this habit of shouting on the street so everyone can hear? By the way, I work here, and my colleagues can hear your comments. The woman grumbled. Well, let them listen. Let them know who you're getting involved with. Mom, I'll ask you nicely, choose your words. Lorenza doesn't deserve such treatment. Nora erupted in a shout. Yes, she does. Who is she anyway? Where did you dig her up? Lorenza works in my department. By the way, she graduated from college with honors. And what difference does that make? She's got countryside written all over her face. Salvador couldn't help but smile. Mom, I think she's a very nice girl. Yeah, that's where all sorts of girls from these little towns run in droves to the city to snag themselves a rich guy. Salvador involuntarily blurted out. Mom, are you judging yourself? After all, if I'm not mistaken, you yourself came to this city from a provincial town about 30 years ago. Nora's eyes became unnaturally wide, she paled, and her mouth began gasping for air. Salvador got genuinely scared and waved a handkerchief frantically in front of her face. Mom, what's wrong with you? You can't take innocent jokes so seriously. The paleness on her face turned into a deep red, and in a deliberately slow manner, Nora pronounced each word clearly. Don't you dare, do you hear me? Never dare speak to me in such a loose tone again. And don't you dare compare me to that girl. Your father and I had true love, that's the kind of feeling they write about in novels. But your Lorenza's face shows her intentions. Salvador barely contained his irritation. A new discovery every day. I never realized you were a physiognomist. You know, Mom, I'm not a little boy anymore whom you can dictate how to live. And I really hope you and Dad learn to respect my decisions." Nora shot another disdainful look at her son. Respect has to be earned, not demanded. The woman tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge, and she cried out, "Salvador, let me out immediately." He silently got out of the car and circled around to her side, gently opening the door for her. Nora emerged from the car. Salvador waited until his mother regained her composure and slowly pulled away from the parking lot. A flicker of hope still lingered in his heart that she would turn around and wave. Nora had a distinct way of gesturing. It was a feature of all specialists who work with people who are deaf. Salvador had learned this sign language as a child and was very proud of it. For him, his parents had always been role models, but today, to his immense regret, he realized that their kindness was fake and the empathy they showed to others was just a collection of fitting words. While his father had been fairly reserved, never boasting about his high status, his mother always made an effort to emphasize her elite background. Salvador remembered that evening when he thoughtlessly decided to introduce his parents to Lorenza. Even 2 months after that event, he still felt the burning shame. Lorenza had very subtly become a part of his life. She hadn't stormed in like they write about in books, and she didn't appear with a halo on her head as a cloud of a nocturnal dream. No, everything was banal to the point of absurdity. Salvador had just started his duties as the department head and was trying to settle into his new role. In the morning, his secretary from the main office had called him to warn him. "Salvador, a new employee will be coming to see you any minute now. Get her up to speed and introduce her to the team. And please, be gentle with her, she's very shy." Salvador promised that everything would be handled excellently. No sooner had he hung up than he heard a timid knock. He quickly adopted a managerial demeanor. "Come in." A person in their 30s, dressed very modestly, awkwardly entered the small office. Remembering his promise, the young man sprang up from behind his desk and began gesturing in front of the visitor. "Don't hesitate, come in and make yourself at home. We have a wonderful team here, and I'm sure you'll find great friends among us." He delivered a dozen more routine phrases, not giving the visitor a chance to speak, then carefully took the woman by the elbow and led her to the door. "And now I'll show you to your workstation. We have the latest computers and a secure data protection system." All department employees observed this scene with interest when suddenly the lady freed her arm and asked in a very loud voice, "Why do I need your computers? I won't even touch them with a finger. When I worked at another company, they immediately warned me not to get within 2 meters of them." A meaningful silence hung in the air. The lady was the first to break it. She looked at Salvador imploringly. "Could you show me where the restroom and the janitor's room are instead? I'll get to work right away." Only after the woman had asked about the restroom did Salvador realize that she was being hired as a janitor. The department staff were holding their stomachs from laughter, and he didn't know where to hide from embarrassment. He found himself in such a ridiculous situation for the first time, and for several minutes, anger boiled inside him like a volcano. He even thought of calling his boss's secretary and letting out everything he was thinking, but he had to finish dealing with the new janitor first. He showed the woman to the janitor's room and returned to his office. No sooner had Salvador sat down at his desk than there was another knock on the door. A girl appeared at the threshold, resembling a schoolgirl. She politely bowed for some reason. "Hello. I'm here to work for you." He boiled with indignation, and he thought, another prank? Isn't this a bit much for one day? The visitor continued to smile, and he too stretched his lips and said with a sneer, "Sorry, but we've reached our janitor limit for today. Come back when there's an opening." The girl looked at him puzzled. "Didn't you know about this?" He chuckled foolishly. "I did. Well, that's why I'm here." Salvador felt an incredible rush of excitement, and he went with it. "Very well. Let me show you the restroom first, and then I'll take you to the storage room where we keep the buckets and rags." He made faces in front of the girl, who stared at him with astonished eyes. Then, unexpectedly, she asked in a firm voice, "Are you all right?" The question hit him like a slap in the face, instantly restoring his psychological balance. "Why, do I seem so insane to you?" The girl replied very calmly. "Your eyes are darting around like someone is crazy. And in general, you're telling such nonsense." "Thanks, you snapped me back to reality." Reflecting on this introduction scene later, Salvador was amazed at how calmly Lorenza had carried herself. She hadn't panicked or burst into tears. Instead, she waited for the situation to unfold with remarkable composure. Initially, their interactions were purely professional. It was only 2 months later, during a lunch break, that they found themselves in the same cafe. Salvador had managed to secure a table and was enjoying his coffee when he noticed Lorenza looking for a free spot. He waved to her. "Lorenza, you can join me here." She thanked him politely, and he, out of courtesy, asked, "Should I wait for you?" "As you wish." 2 days later, he invited her to the same cafe himself, and she accepted. This period was short-lived, and it was soon replaced by short walks after work. Then Salvador invited her to a concert by a popular band. After the amazing event, they walked around the city until late, sharing their impressions. Salvador himself felt that it was time to move on to the next stage of their relationship. During their customary lunch break at the cafe, he asked, "Lorenza, how do you feel about dates?" She bestowed him with a charming smile. "Positively. I think in such meetings, besides romance, there's an air of mystery. And I adore everything that's shrouded in secrecy." "Well, you should have studied to become a writer or a screenwriter instead of an economist." "Why not both?" "The inclination towards the extraordinary comes from my father. He's, as my mother says, not of this world. He's a creative person and loves to fantasize." "You've intrigued me. I'd like to meet your father. I appreciate unconventional people. What do your parents do?" "My mother is a speech therapist. She helps children and adults with speech problems. And my father was recently appointed rector of a very prestigious university." The girl looked at Salvador with respect. "Wow. My parents are simple peasants. My mother has worked on a farm her whole life, and my father delivers mail." Salvador never attached importance to the social status of his friends and acquaintances, so the information about Lorenza's parents also passed through his consciousness. He only remembered it when he decided to invite her over. Of course, he talked to his parents beforehand. He showed up at their place late in the evening before the weekend, and his father opened the door. "Mother, our son has arrived. Come and greet him." Nora rushed into the hallway. She was wearing a satin robe, and her entire face except for her eyes was covered in green goo. "Salvador, as always, you show up without warning and catch your mother in such an inappropriate state." "It's all right, Mom, I'm used to it. And beauty is the most important thing for any woman. It's good to know you understand me. Lately, your father has become insufferable. He's constantly grumbling at me." David smirked. "It's just boredom. We've been together for so many years that we've gotten on each other's nerves." He paused, winked slyly at his son. "Maybe you should get married already. Otherwise, your mother and I will grow old waiting for grandchildren." Salvador also winked at his father. "Perhaps your wish will come true soon. It seems I've met a girl I want to always have by my side. Parents, how do you feel about getting to know her?" David was genuinely delighted. It was evident in his lively conversation and mood. But Nora was cautious about this news and spent the entire evening questioning her son about his girlfriend. On the upcoming weekend, an important visit took place, and Salvador immediately sensed that Lorenza didn't sit well with his mother. The guest also sensed the hostility from the hostess and was reserved the whole evening. When it was time to serve coffee, Nora called her son. "Salvador, help me, I can't manage alone." The young man entered the kitchen and immediately fell under a barrage of criticism. Nora was whispering so loudly that he closed the door. "My son, who have you brought into the house? Are you planning to tie your life to this simpleton?" "Mom, we haven't decided anything yet, we're just dating. But I won't lie to you, I really like Lorenza. She's an extraordinary girl." They're all extraordinary at first, and then they turn into shrews and split the property. "Mom, people are not the same. I just want to open your eyes, my dear. Take a closer look at your Lorenza, think it through carefully. If you still value our opinion, I can tell you that this girl is not a match for you." Salvador didn't want to ruin his mood, and after the boring gathering, he left his parents' home with Lorenza. The girl was sad and remained silent throughout the journey. Only before the dormitory where she was temporarily staying, she said with melancholy, "Salvador, it was a mistake to arrange this meeting. I didn't make a good impression on your parents. I don't know about your father, but your mother is definitely against me. Don't fill your head with negative thoughts. My mother, in life, is a difficult person. Just don't pay her any attention." Soon they decided to get married, but they didn't inform their parents about this step. For a long time, the phrase unequal marriage that his mother had mentioned kept haunting Salvador's mind. But after the last conversation with his mother, he realized it was time to draw a line and tell his parents about his decision. His father called the next day. "Salvador, we need to meet and talk. Mother was beside herself yesterday, and I want to know what you told her." Salvador had been waiting for this call and had mentally prepared himself for it. He calmly replied, "It's more like she unloaded a whole cartload of complaints on me." There was a metallic tone in David's voice. "Son, you know that your mother worries about you. After all, you're our only child, so we're naturally worried. Dad, you and Mom are forgetting one important detail. I'm already 26. All right, let's really discuss everything when we meet." "Fine, I'll be waiting for you at the city park at our usual spot at 6. In Salvador's childhood, he often spent time with his father at the park. It was a favorite spot for the townspeople, and on weekends, it was always crowded. David was an avid hunter and loved showing off his marksmanship at the shooting range. He patiently taught his son to hit the bullseye as well. These memories brought about a tinge of sadness. Why do all the best things happen in childhood? As soon as a person grows up, this infamous abyss of misunderstanding appears between the closest people. He asked his father this question, who was waiting for him by the shooting range. David was surprised. "You decided to jump right into the heart of the matter, huh? Well done. I spent the whole day thinking about how to start speaking on the delicate topic. Dad, I feel like our conversation won't make much sense at all because Lorenza and I have already made a decision." David furrowed his brows. "So, what decision have you made?" "We're getting married. It's as simple as that. We're adults and haven't needed parental supervision for a long time. In short, we're getting married in 3 months." David fell into thought, and Salvador patiently waited. He really wanted to draw a line under this phase of his life as soon as possible. He understood that his parents genuinely wished him happiness, but they had a completely different understanding of what that happiness entailed. As if reading his thoughts, his father said, "Of course, your mother and I didn't expect things to turn out this way. Dad, can you really script even a single individual's life? In general, I believe that such matters shouldn't be up for discussion because only 2 people should decide their fate. And Lorenza and I have already made our choice, whether you like it or not." David patted his son on the shoulder. "All right, calm down. I promised to talk to your mother about this today." They chatted a bit more about trivial matters and said their goodbyes. The next day, Nora appeared at the office. She walked confidently down the corridor, and admiring glances followed her. Salvador saw his mother, and he was struck by surprise. Nora was pleased with the effect she had produced. "Salvador, your father and I talked yesterday, and here I am. Show me your Lorenza. I really want to have a chat with her." Salvador looked at his mother suspiciously, but she reassured him. Don't worry, I won't say anything unnecessary. Since this has happened, we need to mend relationships. He showed his mother where Lorenza worked and left the two women alone. Nora returned after half an hour. She's a pleasant girl and quite clever. Salvador was very nervous, although he tried to hide it. His mother gently touched his hand. Salvador, I'm not your enemy, don't worry. We just had a little chat, and I even liked the girl. By the way, I invited her parents to visit. I think it's the right thing to do because we need to jointly plan where your wedding will take place. Mom, Lorenza, and I wanted to keep things low-key. It doesn't matter. Our opinion matters too. You know, your bride's father is a wonderful accordionist. He plays at weddings in their village. Yes, Lorenza told me. Nora looked at her son lovingly once more and sighed. Maybe you'll manage to work things out. All right, I won't bother you. I advise you to personally visit their village. Salvador was surprised. Why should I go there? What a silly question. You'll bring your relatives in your car. Mom, Lorenza's parents have their own car. Even her mother is perfectly capable of driving. This news surprised the woman, and she twisted her lips into an unpleasant smirk. Salvador accurately sensed her mood. Mom, did you really think that people in the village are destitute and live in poverty, eating cucumbers with potatoes and sleeping in a hayloft? I think it's about time for you to visit relatives too. Aren't you drawn to your homeland? Imagine, I'm not drawn at all. And I'll tell you more, memories of my childhood evoke not so pleasant associations. But I don't want to burden you with my little secrets, let everything stay as it is. She looked at him again with that unique gaze that only a mother can give. Lorenza only confessed to her mother about her upcoming marriage just before her departure. However, she chose a very unfortunate moment for this revelation, as Claudia was once again busy with canning. She couldn't hold onto the jar, and it crashed onto the floor. The brine splashed across the surface, drenching the hostess's legs. Sweetie, is this a joke? Lorenza grabbed a cloth. Mom, why are you reacting like this? How should I react, then? Tell me, how should I behave after your words? You're not ready for married life at all. Evaristo also joined in to clean up the aftermath of the accident. Claudia, remember yourself. You weren't preparing for marriage from the cradle either. And look, you survived and learned everything. Our daughter will learn too. She's a smart girl. Claudia paused for a moment to gather her thoughts. Then she draped a light scarf over her shoulders. I'm going to consult with Grandma. It's necessary. Evaristo was surprised, but he decided it would be better to keep quiet. When his wife left, he winked at his daughter. So, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like the ice is breaking. Maybe my dear women should settle it peacefully? The man was right. For the first time in 22 years, Ursula welcomed her future daughter-in-law warmly. Seeing Claudia's flustered appearance, she guessed that she already knew everything. Come in, my dear. Just don't worry so much. Everyone gets married. You and I will need to think about what to gift Lorenza for the wedding. Claudia sighed. Ursula, believe me, I'm not in the mood for gifts right now. I'm thinking about how she'll manage on her own there without us. Everything will be fine. She went to college and managed it, didn't she? And she will manage it with her husband, if this Salvador is the way she described him. And don't speak so disparagingly about the gift. I already have a little idea. Her mother-in-law briefly explained her plan, and the future daughter-in-law was shocked once again. Do you think it will work out? Ursula said confidently. Of course it will. I've already found out everything and even found a good lawyer. But that's how much money we'll have to spend. The elderly woman waved her hand dismissively. What do I need these papers for? Take them with me to the other world? Let at least my only granddaughter benefit from them. Lorenza knew nothing about the negotiations between the relatives. After a week of vacation, she returned to the city, and on the very first day, her future mother-in-law visited her at work. Nora was not the same as during their first meeting, and she even impressed Evaristo. The girl was even more delighted when Salvador told her that his parents were expecting her relatives. Lorenza, you probably know that in the old days, there was a tradition. The girl interrupted the young man. If you mean getting acquainted, then in the villages this custom is still observed, only the groom's relatives come to the brides. And with us, it will be the other way around. I don't mind spending an evening as the center of attention. The joke was successful, and they both laughed together. In their cheerful excitement, the newlyweds envisioned how the party would go. But they didn't expect the real turn this event would take. The entire Torres family arrived at the appointed time by car at the home of the professorial couple. Salvador's parents tried to show their warmth and hospitality. David managed this quite well, but insincerity was palpable in Nora's smiles and words. Evaristo whispered to his wife, "If I were to judge, I'd say loudly right now, I don't believe it." He misjudged the power of his voice, and indeed, that phrase sounded quite loud. The smile vanished from Nora's face. "Did you say something?" "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." Evaristo quickly realized what to say. "Yes, I wanted to say that I don't believe those who claim that city life is much better. We've only been here for a few hours, and my head is spinning from the noise. And the air here isn't as clean as in the village. You probably can't find groceries without all sorts of additives in the store." The Ray spouses exchanged bewildered glances, while Nora forced a strained smile. "I also lived in a small town, and my grandmother even had a cow," Ursula enthusiastically said. "And I still have one to this day. The little cow feeds us and allows for some luxury." The mask of respectability quickly fell from the hostess's face. "What are you talking about? What luxury is there in the village? There aren't even proper stores there. And don't get me started on beauty salons and regular hairdressers. Of course, I understand that every crow must praise its own swamp. But you don't even have a proper place to have a wedding." The guests remained silent and averted their eyes, only Ursula locked her gaze onto the groom's mother. "Why do you have such a negative view of the village? As if you were eaten alive by mosquitoes there. Believe me, we're not naive either, and we have proper celebrations too. So, tell me, what are you planning to give to the children as a gift for their wedding?" The Rays exchanged glances again. This time, the professor himself answered, "We've decided to give them a fairy tale, that is, an unforgettable trip to the ends of the earth." Nora smirked. "You probably haven't heard of a place called the Maldives," Ursula said. "Don't consider us fools, we've heard of these islands and even seen them on TV. I just don't understand why they would go there when we can have a good time by the river. Why waste money unnecessarily? But we've decided to gift the young couple the business with our future daughter-in-law and son." Ursula was expecting anything but silence. The future in-laws looked at her, trying to hold back their laughter. Nora was the first to give in and burst out laughing. "Granny, what kind of business? Where did you get that kind of money?" Ursula dropped the formalities. "Don't you laugh, I'm not joking. I really am buying a business that's on its last legs. I've scraped together everything I could. Just in time to have everything set up by the wedding. Let the kids manage it as they see fit. Well, for the time being, I'll become an investor, meaning I'll invest the remaining money in them." Silence fell over the table once again, and only the smile disappeared from Nora's face. "I don't understand anything. Even if this isn't a joke, the company, as you call it, is bankrupt." Ursula smirked. "What's that trendy word? Come on, granddaughter, help me out. When do they conduct those challenges?" Lorenza timidly suggested. "You mean Quest?" "Exactly. That's the one. Let's see how our newlyweds, whom we've taught for so many years, will fare in this quest. Well, and we'll always help with advice." Nora looked at her husband bewilderedly. Everything was going off course from the plan she had formulated. After the mention of the Maldives, the new relatives were supposed to get confused and start wondering what it was all about. And once they figured it out, they would realize they had hit a dead end. Right now, Nora felt as if they were the ones who had hit a dead end. Lorenza looked at her delighted grandmother and mother, no less astonished. Salvador was sitting silently, but grand plans were already forming in his mind. He was confident in his abilities and in his future wife's strengths. The most bewildered of all was Evaristo. He didn't really understand what the conversation was about. What's more, he felt hurt that they hadn't consulted with him. Well, Claudia, he was already used to the fact that she didn't consider him a person. But his mom? How could she get along so well with his wife? Evaristo was feeling quite scared overall. Of course, he always complained about how Ursula and Claudia didn't get along. But now, if they were to communicate well, which was likely to happen, his peaceful life would come to an end. David cleared his throat, and everyone turned to him as if he were the only one who could say something sensible. Here's what I think, Nora. Let's postpone the vacation for now. Maybe it's more practical to just give the kids the money and let them invest in their own venture. I have a feeling that with a grandmother like yours, all doors will be open to them and everything will work out. Nora looked at her husband as if he were a traitor, then silently got up from the table and left. Salvador went after her for about 10 minutes, but Nora refused to come out. She said that she was sorry, but she suddenly got a terrible migraine. Claudia stood up. Well, it's time for us to go. David rose from the table. Where are you going? It's almost night outside, and there are too many kilometers left to drive. Claudia smiled, managed to steady her swaying husband, and replied, Well, we don't live at the edge of the world. It's just been a couple of hours, and we're already home. Besides, you forget that we're not city dwellers, and we have household chores at home. David looked at his future daughter-in-law with surprise, thinking, wow, she knows how to fire back without being noticed. Well, see for yourselves. By the way, we didn't really talk about the wedding. In the hallway, Lorenza was scolding her father because he managed to sneakily eat without anyone noticing. Salvador was helping him keep steady. Claudia smiled and looked at the host. Well, now it's your turn to come visit us, and definitely stay overnight. You need to see for yourself how clean the air is in the evening in our area. David suddenly realized that neither Lorenza nor her mother had opened up immediately. They seemed like ordinary, modest women, and talking to Lorenza was a pleasure. She pronounced all her words correctly, and there wasn't a hint of any rural intonations. He became quite curious about what life was like for his future in-laws. Of course, he remembered that today they had a task: embarrass Lorenza's parents and ruin the wedding. But now he understood, the wedding would happen even if they threatened to stop it at the cost of their lives. After the guests left, Nora came out of the room. So, what are we going to do? David wanted to respond rudely, but then he thought that he, like his wife, had also intended to do everything to ruin this wedding. So he approached his wife, hugged her. We'll be getting ready to visit our future relatives. Because of your migraine, we didn't discuss the wedding. But, David. Enough, Nora. Let's just accept the situation. Try to come to terms with it. By the way, the more I talk to Lorenza, the more I like her. You know, there's something about her. Some inner strength, you might say. She seems like a dandelion on the surface, a simple girl. But dig a little deeper. No, definitely. You need to get to know her better. And besides, as you can see, none of our assumptions have been confirmed. I think Lorenza isn't interested in our immense wealth at all. The last words were said in such a pretentious, theatrical tone that Nora couldn't help but snort. Oh, you built your career in the wrong place, David. Salvador tried not to catch the attention of his parents. Firstly, he was a bit shocked by the gift from Lorenza's family, and secondly, he knew how tough it was to lose. Or rather, to accept defeat gracefully, and his mother definitely lost. He would just wait until things calmed down. In the evening, he and Lorenza were supposed to get acquainted with the company that Lorenza's grandmother had mentioned. Of course, selling the company was not a quick process, but the owner who wanted to get rid of it kindly offered them an introductory tour. The feeling was quite unusual. They were going together to see their future business. His mother called 4 days later. "Hello, son." Salvador cautiously replied, not expecting anything good. "Hi, Mom. What happened? Why don't you call or come home?" "I have a lot of work, and we were getting familiar with the company too," he said, nearly biting his tongue. Why did he say that to his mother? She wouldn't be happy for him anyway, Salvador was sure of that. "Well, tell that to your father. You know, I'm not strong in financial matters, that's where your dad's expertise is, and I'm more about spending. And about the wedding, be a dear and call Lorenza. Let her know when it's convenient for us to come." "Mom, but I can't just say right away that I accept you, Lorenza, but I'll try." Salvador hung up, wanting to call Lorenza's number, then waved his hand and went to her himself. After recounting the call from his mother, he suddenly smiled. "You know, Lorenza, it's so unusual to feel that my mom won't be putting obstacles in our way anymore." Lorenza smiled. "Well, you can understand her, you're her only son. It's natural that she doesn't want to let you go." Salvador looked at his fiancée with admiration. "You're amazing. You must understand that my mom was against you, and now you're defending her." Lorenza shrugged. "Just put yourself in her shoes. Do you think my mom cried with delight when I told her I was getting married?" They both laughed. "Good Lord, what kind of punishment is this? Evaristo, why are you lying down? You'll turn into moss soon." Evaristo pretended to be fast asleep. "I'll either tap your forehead with a ladle or pour cold water on you." He suddenly opened his eyes. He somehow missed the moment when his mother arrived. Apparently, he actually dozed off. Well, if Ursula was here, there would be no resting. Claudia had more words, but his mother had never hesitated to use all means to achieve her goal. He sat up on the bed. "So, are you clucking around like hens? You need to finish building the terrace quickly so you can gather there and not disturb my rest. It's past 7, and I went to bed after 2. Claudia immediately turned to him. "And what do you think? If I hide the TV from you at night, will you go to bed on time?" Evaristo shivered. "Oh, she can actually do it. She'll take it and hide it. Women really know how to fight back." He glanced at his mother, then at Claudia. They both looked at him with the same expression. Evaristo thought to himself, well, that's it, the worst thing that could happen has happened. They became a team, which means my song is being sung. But no, we'll still fight. What is the early morning gathering for? Claudia put her hands on her hips before giving him a lecture. "Did you notice anything else when you were watching your football game yesterday?" Evaristo stared at her in confusion. "I was watching football, yes. I hid the beer under the armchair. What's football without beer? And what could have happened yesterday? Did a star fall from the sky? I'm going to hit you now, and you'll have a star burning right between your eyes." Ursula nodded in agreement. "And I'll add some more to that." Evaristo was starting to freak out. "Seriously, what's wrong with you? Can you say things normally?" Claudia even stamped her foot. "I told you yesterday that I came to you twice, and it seems you didn't even notice me." Evaristo furrowed his brow. Right, she had come, he remembered. But he thought she wanted to take his beer, so he pretended to be focused on a tense moment in the football game. "Evaristo, Salvador's parents are coming over for the weekend. Do you understand?" Evaristo rubbed his hands together. He loved holidays. First, they were fun. Secondly, Claudia cooked all sorts of delicious treats that would last for a week. Thirdly, of course, there would be drinks he was constantly prohibited from having. Well, and fourthly, when guests were around and it was a celebration, no one bothered him, he could legally do nothing. Not that he was planning to be overly active, but during a holiday, he could do nothing officially. But as it turned out, Ursula wasn't the only mind reader. Claudia immediately said, "If you think you're going to lie on the couch and wait for the guests calmly, you're deeply mistaken. Now you'll have breakfast and finally go finish the terrace, and then tidy up the yard. In short, make everything neat." Evaristo even laughed. "Well, you came up with something. There's still a lot of work to do. What can I do in 3 hours?" Ursula chimed in. "Don't worry, son, I'll help you, with words and, if necessary, with a stick. This is something. You've been building that 3x3 terrace for 3 years." Evaristo stopped smiling. "Are you serious?" Claudia nodded. "As serious as it gets. You have exactly 2 hours to tell me what you need. I'll go buy it, and it's time for me to go to work." Evaristo shifted his gaze between the two of them and realized they weren't joking at all. In fact, he didn't have a choice. Before, he could have complained to Claudia about his mother and heard her say, "This Claudia is driving me crazy." But now he had no one to complain to and nowhere to hide. Nora paced nervously around the apartment. "David, why do we have to stay overnight? Clearly, there are no conveniences there. And anyway..." "Nora, don't jump to conclusions prematurely. Firstly, they didn't strike me as rednecks, so I wouldn't rush to say that everything there is bad. Secondly..." He hesitated, and his wife looked at him in surprise. "You know, Nora, all the work, the hustle and bustle. If we want to relax, we go to the Maldives because of our status. And quite recently, I realized that I'd enjoy sitting by the shore with a fishing rod and actually swatting mosquitoes with pleasure." Nora involuntarily smiled, imagining that scene. "But, probably, it would be much better without mosquitoes, David. But promise me that if there's some kind of cabin there, we'll come back home in the evening, okay?" David played his trump card. "Okay, my general." Nora sighed. They had been married for so many years. Out in public, they were always serious and composed, but at home, when their son wasn't looking, David could be a bit of a clown. And then, it was as if they slipped back into their past years in an instant. It felt so easy and joyful. And then you feel a little sad because you begin to realize that so much will never happen again. "Okay, let's think again about what we need to take with us." David looked at the 2 huge bags sitting in the middle of the room. "I don't understand. How long are we going for?" Nora straightened up. "What's the matter?" "There's nothing extra. Blanket, bedding, medicine, warm clothes, and light clothes." She would have continued with the list, but David raised his hands. "Stop. Imagine if someone came to visit you with all this stuff. You'd probably be upset. So what do you suggest? Should we travel light? Of course, we'll stop by and buy something, a cake or some delicacies." Nora sighed, then simply stepped over the bags. "Well, let's go then. I'll sort all this out later." David looked closely at his wife. Nora was obsessed with cleanliness and order. And leaving the bags in the middle of the apartment and going away? It seems she's in a state of disarray. He hugged her. "Come on, look at me." Nora obediently raised her eyes. "Do you want our son to be happy?" She nodded. "Well, then don't interfere with that. Just help." Salvador pulled up behind them as they were heading into the yard. "Wow, parents. I'm surprised I don't have to drag you into the car by force." David helped his wife get in, then settled himself. "And don't speed, I don't trust you." Salvador immediately felt offended. "Then you should have driven your car, I trust you with it after all." David coughed awkwardly. "Don't be upset, I said it without thinking. Both I and my mother are a bit nervous." Salvador sighed. "I'm nervous too." The first meeting didn't go very well, but let's see how the second one goes. Salvador's phone vibrated. It was on a stand placed on the dashboard. Lorenza was calling, and it was a video call. He had no choice but to answer. David immediately turned the phone towards himself. "Hello, Lorenza. Salvador is driving. Talk, he can hear you." Lorenza looked a bit embarrassed but eventually glanced at her future father-in-law. "Dad's asking how to heat the sauna. Do you like it when there's more steam?" David felt his cheeks twitch. He had been in a sauna only a couple of times, and he never quite managed to repeat the experience. He smiled at the girl. "I don't know if I like it or not, but I'm ready to try anything." Lorenza laughed, nodded, and said goodbye. Nora said, "David, be careful with your wishes, you're not a young boy anymore." David replied, "Everything will be fine, as you'll see." About an hour or so later, Salvador's passengers had fallen asleep in the car. He said, "Well, if the GPS isn't lying, we're almost there." David rubbed his eyes and looked around. They were driving through a fairly large and modern-looking village. "Well, there's nothing here that your mother should be so worried about." Salvador strained his eyes, looking at the houses, and finally smiled. "Look at the house. That's my Lorenza's, she's waiting for us." Nora scrutinized the house. "Well, yes. Maybe it's even possible to stay there. Who knows? Maybe there's even running water in the house." In the house, there was indeed water and a toilet. Of course, Nora immediately praised Evaristo for it, and he modestly kept quiet about the fact that every time it came time to work on the sewage, he'd get some illness. Serious ones like migraines and colic. Claudia had to hire workers, and they built everything here. The guests didn't need to know this. And here we have the terrace. Have a seat. We'll have some coffee on the road. You shouldn't eat before the sauna, but after the sauna, we'll sit here. Evaristo carefully hid his bandaged fingers behind his back. Oh, how much he wanted to tell them how he, poor guy, worked here. How his dear mother didn't even let him catch his breath. But catching Ursula's gaze, he just sighed. Nora looked at the table with wide eyes, around which Claudia and Lorenza were bustling. And this is just for having a cup of coffee? In her understanding, coffee was just a cup of coffee and maybe a piece of candy. But here, everything was so indulgent yet so appetizing. She silently watched as her husband, a respectable man who even used proper utensils for eating at home, scooped up sour cream with some kind of reckless pleasure using a bright, large wooden spoon that, for some reason, the sour cream didn't slide or drip off of but just sat there in a heap and put it in his mouth. David even closed his eyes in pleasure and then, without opening them, said, "Nora, do you think what we're eating is the real sour cream?" "Not at all. Sour cream, as it turns out, is something completely different." Ursula smiled approvingly. Well, the future in-law doesn't seem as bad as she initially thought. She pushed a plate of cottage cheese towards him, and David aimed and scooped up an equally large pile. Salvador and Lorenza watched him with smiles, while Nora feverishly tried to calculate how many calories were in all this. Then it was time to try their own smoked meat, and then the pastries made by Ursula. After 10 minutes, Nora gave in. Everyone at the table was eating with such an appetite that resisting was simply impossible. It felt like she couldn't even move. Claudia invited her inside. "Let's go, Nora, I'll show you where you'll be sleeping. And, in general, let the men rest without us." Ursula went to the veranda to relax, while Lorenza, Nora, and Claudia headed into the house. Nora followed the homeowner and realized, strangely enough, that she didn't annoy her. Full-figured women had always irritated Nora, even if they had just a couple of extra kilograms. Claudia had significantly more than 2 kilograms. She wasn't fat, more like voluptuous, and moved swiftly. In the house, as Nora managed to notice, there was impeccable cleanliness, which was very important to her. And Nora also understood that she simply couldn't imagine Claudia being slim. Here, this is your room. Salvador and I will sleep on the veranda. Nora raised her eyebrows in surprise. The whole room? Well, of course. I don't want you to feel cramped. If you want, you can rest. The sauna still needs a couple of hours. Nora didn't end up resting, or rather, her husband David didn't allow her to. He peeked into her room. Nora, how about we take a walk? See some people and get to the river. She wanted to refuse, but when she saw the plea in her husband's eyes, she just sighed. They had barely walked 100 meters when an old man appeared in front of them as if from the ground. Good health to you. Nora stared at him in surprise. He looked like a character from a fairy tale. David smiled particularly warmly. Hello. There was no way they could just walk past him. The old man stood in such a way that they would have had to deliberately bypass him. And since he wasn't retreating, that meant he had more to say. So they needed to be polite. I can't figure it out. Who are you? Grandpa, we're here as visitors. And who are you visiting? The situation was becoming humorous, but it was clear that it was better to answer because this old man wouldn't let it go so easily. We're visiting Claudia and Evaristo. Oh, as potential in-laws? Well, you could say that. The old man pondered for a moment. Yes, you're lucky with Claudia. She's a respected person here. You could say it's irreplaceable. In case of anything, people immediately run to her, and everyone knows for sure that if anyone can save an animal, it's only Claudia. Her mother-in-law, on the other hand, is a rare piece of work, but what can you say about her? Ursula is Ursula. The old man disappeared just as suddenly as he had appeared. Nora blinked her eyes and then asked, "And? What was that?" David, rubbing his hands with delight, answered, "That, Nora, is local color. Let's go quickly. Look, the river is ahead." He grabbed Nora's hand and practically dragged her to the river. Nora praised herself for her foresight. She had managed to change out of high-heeled shoes into simple slippers. And she rushed after her husband. Memories of those years, when she and David had just met, came flooding back. He used to grab her hand like this and drag her somewhere he thought she'd find really interesting. The moment Nora got distracted by the beauty of the river, David vanished. She looked around and saw him engaged in a serious conversation with a boy of around 7 who was sitting with a fishing rod. Then David stood up, shook the boy's hand, and returned to her. Nora remained silent, knowing for sure that he wouldn't hold back. And indeed, less than 5 minutes passed before David started talking rapidly. You won't believe it, but the kids in this village are so mature. Domingo will be waiting for me at 6 in the morning, and he'll even bring me his fishing rod. No way. Listen, David, aren't we getting carried away? David became serious. You know, the more time I spend here, the more I realize that it's the city where we're playing. And here, in this place, you can be yourself without any worries. Nora sighed. In a way, her husband was right. She understood that, but she didn't want to accept it. Nora had built all of this, their whole world. Or was it fiction after all? For Nora, the sauna turned out to be a huge shock. No, she had certainly visited some saunas before. But there was an indescribable aroma and an indescribable sensation. When it felt like your skin was cracking, you had to cool it down. But at the same time, you had to be careful not to touch the walls because soot didn't wash off easily. They were sitting on the terrace, and Evaristo, who had already had a few shots and had his bandaged fingers waving, injured during construction, was grandiosely saying, "Look around. What beauty, what spaciousness." Claudia smiled affectionately at him. "Father, instead of going on, why don't you grab an accordion and play something for us?" He looked at his hands with doubt, but then waved it off. A true master of his craft wouldn't be bothered by a finger pounded by a hammer. Nora was sitting close to her husband, and David even closed his eyes, listening to the melody. No matter how lacking Evaristo was in practical skills, as a musician, he was undoubtedly gifted. When the melody faded, Nora suddenly said, "You know, I must apologize to all of you for my behavior and my thoughts. I haven't felt as good as you do right now in a long time. There's such tranquility here, as if this is the only right spot in the world. I admit that I thought that a village girl wouldn't be a match for my son. And now I think that both he and I are very lucky." Claudia smiled, and Ursula said, "Don't worry, Nora. I came here 50 years ago, and it took me a while to accept that things are good here and that the people here are good. I called the entire village by a trendy word back then." David stood up. "I have a great idea." Evaristo immediately grabbed a bottle. "We need a drink for it." Claudia gave him a stern look, and Evaristo deflated. "Claudia, come on, what's the matter?" "It's for the idea." Lorenza laughed, followed by Salvador. It seemed like they'd been forgotten altogether. And they watched their parents from their corner with pleasure. Their laughter caught on with Ursula, and then everyone joined in. After they had a good laugh, David continued, "So, today we've all gathered here because of our children. But the atmosphere is so relaxing that it's hard to think about anything serious at all. And I have an idea. But please note, it's just an idea. If the young ones don't like it, we'll forget about it." He paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Soon, our children will become a family. Thanks to Grandma and, of course, their parents, they'll have plenty to do. And because of that, we won't be seeing them very often. And if in the city we might be able to catch them somehow, here." Claudia let out a sad sigh. She has been thinking about this for several days now. And the future father-in-law continued, "So, I was thinking, why don't we have the wedding in the village at least? There's so much space here. We'll bring everything, the toastmaster, waitstaff, you can't imagine how great it would be." Nora wanted to protest. How on earth could he come up with something like that? And the guests? The outfits? The beauty salons? How could her husband even imagine all of this? But for some reason, the words didn't come out. There was a sense of wild, beautiful countryside revelry in her mind. And then David cautiously looked at his wife, but she remained silent. So he turned to Lorenza and Salvador. "Well, what do you say?" Salvador also got excited about the idea. "Why not? We could throw a celebration here like no one's ever seen in the village." Lorenza looked at him with surprise. "Wow. Weren't you the one saying you didn't want all those boring ceremonies?" "Well, those are boring, but this is different." Salvador, the boss, hugged David. "You don't understand. This isn't just a vacation, it's a super vacation. And what a family we've got. A sight to behold. And both of them are working. It's true that Salvador said he's quitting, but I'm not offended. I understand that young people need to grow." Boss Salvador and Lorenza had quite a bit to drink, and now everyone was trying to get him into the car that had come for him. But it wasn't so simple. Sometimes he stumbled, sometimes he gave a toast, and sometimes he hugged everyone. But in the end, after one last stumble, they had to carry him to the car. David's respected and serious colleagues weren't in the best condition either. They all said, "The air here is something special, unlike anywhere else." The village had indeed not seen a wedding like this in many years. Perhaps it had never heard of such a thing at all. All the neighbors celebrated it, everyone who had even the slightest connection with the Torres family. And so many people from the city had come. Only a year had passed since that event, and Salvador and Lorenza were already thriving. Their company was receiving its first orders, and David recommended it to his friends. The children didn't visit them often anymore, which was understandable. There was so much work to do. But Nora and David hardly worried. They had little time. Every weekend, right after work, their car sped to the village. While they were visiting relatives, they stayed with them, but with a little more time, their own house that they were building would be ready. They had chosen this village, of course, as the place to spend their later years and relax away from the noisy city.